Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for the opportunity to share with you today some of my thoughts around the renewable energy industry. I think a lot of what I'm going to be talking about has a lot to do with exactly what Energy Talent Co. is doing today, and so I hope that maybe at the end of the session, those of us who are on the call will see how important it is the role that you play in the ecosystem. And hopefully, if we have people getting involved more, that would be absolutely amazing. So very quickly, I'll go through the slides very quickly, and then we can, take questions if there are any at the Q&A session. So please, let's go into the first slide. Okay, so basically, we're going to be talking about how the renewable energy industry has evolved, where we are today, and where we see, where we see the industry going, and how we can actually achieve a sustainable ecosystem for everybody involved. In 2006, this is basically the story of where we've come from as a country, and especially in the industry. In 2006, we had the Nigeria Renewable Energy Master Plan that was implemented by the Federal Ministry of Environment with support from, I think, the UNDP. Just to show a quick, sample of where we thought we would be, by under that plan, we were supposed to have total installed capacity of about 29 gigawatts as at 2025. We're supposed to have renewable energy contributing about 10% of that sum. Today, we're short of even the target of 2015 under that plan. Today we have about, depending on who you ask, but I think this particular stat I pulled from the Power Africa website, we're about 12,500 to 13,000 megawatts, about 13 gigawatts. And, renewable energy is, I would say less than 1% of that mix today. Why is it important? Because Nigeria is basically an energy poor country, and energy poverty is, as we see it in Olon, at the root of so many other contributing factors to poverty in Nigeria. And so we see the fight against energy poverty and energy access as one of the most important things and problems that we can solve in order to build on top of that. If you go to the next slide, it shows this clearly. Currently Nigeria's 13 gigawatts, is way, I don't know if you remember the MINT countries. That was basically a consultant term that was put up around the Africa Rising agenda, where we were being compared to Mexico and Turkey and Indonesia as similar demographics and similar growth rates. If you pull that comparison today, we are completely, well below what the average is for those countries. We have an average of about 43 gigawatts. Today, Nigeria is about 13 gigawatts, at 12.5 gigawatts. According to United Nations, you have, for you to be considered a middle income country, you should be consuming roughly about 3,000 kilowatt hour per capita. That's in terms of energy or electricity consumption per capita. Today, Nigeria, I think we consume about 144 kilowatt hours per capita. And if you compare that to our neighbors, I think Ghana consumes about 300 kilowatt hours per capita. Kenya consumes about 164 kilowatt hours per capita. And South Africa is something about 4,000 kilowatt hours per capita. And so Nigeria is clearly lagging behind what we would consider to be our peer countries. Today we have, if you look at the chart on the right, Jazar research, we have about just over 70% of Nigerians can be defined as off-grid and bad grid. In fact, we have 38% of Nigerians who are not serviced at all by the existing grid infrastructure. Next slide. Why is that? Why is that happening today? We have had a combination of factors. One, grid access obviously is a very expensive endeavor. And we all know the story of the on-grid sector with the distribution companies being marred by the lack of cost-reflective tariffs. And so a lot of investment not being able to come into that sector. But today, what we see, especially when faced with the constraint of expensive grid expansion, what we believe, especially in All-On, is that there is an opportunity for the off-grid industry to really service some of this energy access gap, and especially in All-On, this is our reason for being, really, to facilitate this entrepreneurial process. We believe that entrepreneurs are the ones that can scope out a business case and take advantage of the gaps that we see in our economy, and you're seeing that in other instances or other areas of the economy. And we believe that the same situation is happening in the power industry. So where are we today? Today, the off-grid, I'm going to call it off-grid or renewable energy industry. We can really choose the word that we want to use. We have improving regulatory environment. I saw the slides from the last conference, and if you were, or the last webinar, so if you were there, you would have seen some of the talk around the regulatory environment. But just to touch on it very quickly, we have the NERC, which has issued guidelines for mini grids, interconnected mini grids, and eligible customer regulations. Unfortunately, some of the good work that the government is doing, including the REA and other agencies in the government that are really supporting the industry, then becomes taken back when you then look at what is happening in the importation process. So what you have is arbitrary import regulations, arbitrary enforcement of import duties, and customs. You hear stories of customs really just taking one component and applying the tariff that is due for another type of component entirely to that. And that's an arbitrary process unless you go and report them to the Ministry of Finance or get a waiver. So this is a real problem and an obstacle to the growth of the industry because it leads to uncertainty and also increased cost for energy providers. I think a lot of the solar home systems distributors that we work with face this problem. Another major issue we have is the access to finance. And so that's what we call financing here. Obviously, companies like All-On, this is our point. So we are, one of the roles we play is providing finance to renewable energy entrepreneurs. But as the sector grows, and it is growing very quickly, you have a lot of demand for funds for capex. The renewable energy, especially the power industry, really is capital intensive. You need to build storage, you need to build panels, you need to build distribution, and those things cost a lot of money. But the available pool of capital is just not sufficient, because for as many impact investors like All-On that you have, we can't do it all by ourselves. We need to be able to tap into the commercial banking and the commercial lending sector in a meaningful way. And right now, you see a case of banks who have been exposed to the power industry, either on the off-grid or on-grid sector, that are just not able or willing to lend to the off-grid sector as yet until the business case has been proven. And this is what is happening right now. And this is the process that investors like All-On are trying to support by taking first risk capital positions in some of these projects. Again, we also have payments. Payments is a huge issue, especially when you talk about off-grid electrification, because you see a lot of these developers going into rural areas that are very geographically dispersed, and sometimes they don't have mobile network, they don't have payment infrastructure, and so you have a lot of cash collections and all the problems that come with cash movement and cash handling. And so that lack of national network has limited the ability of the industry to scale today. And this is one of the problems that technology and entrepreneurs can actually help to work on. And then I think the final thing that I wanted to touch on was in terms of awareness and awareness of the industry, awareness of viable technologies. As in all on, we see all sorts of technologies, we see all sorts of companies coming to pitch to us, and there's a lot of fantastic innovation that is happening in the industry. But from a consumer standpoint, it's also a hard case to sell sometimes, because I like to say we are in the second wave of renewable energy innovation in Nigeria. The first wave was really, the flood of cheap products from China with no standards, nobody really checking oversight. That came in, and their main point of competition was the fact that they were dirt cheap. And so they spread, but then they didn't perform. And so we had a lot of people who had tested those inverters and those battery systems and those solar panels, being scared of from renewable energy and telling their friends that this is not able to power their needs, which is not the case. There has been a lot of innovation in the sector. Next slide, please. Okay, and so to touch on some of that innovation, we just wanted to very quickly look at a map of where the industry is today. So today, with the exception of a few banks, the renewable energy industry is really powered by donors, impact investors, and underpinned or driven by some of the government's rural electrification strategy. I like to say that rural electrification is not the only box that you should put renewable energy, because as long as it is being put in that rural electrification box, you take away from the actual merit of value proposition of the sector and of the entrepreneurs who are in the sector, which can compete, outside of rural electrification. But today, in terms of the donors, you have people like the Power Africa program, GIZ, the African Development Bank has a number of facilities. As all along, we also have a lot of collaborations with some of these players. For instance, we have the Off-Grid Electrification Fund, which is a $50 million renewable energy investment fund that we seeded, and we're partnering with the Africa Development Bank in implementing that facility. We also have, I don't know if anyone's familiar, but in terms of our early stage program, we have a partnership with the USADF, where we basically fund early stage and even ideation stage solar energy, renewable energy businesses, basically, across Nigeria. And I think in that portfolio, we have funded about 12 to 13 companies till date, and we're actively adding more into that cohort. In terms of impact investors, we have Electrify, we have Breakthrough Energy Ventures, who's doing some work in Nigeria. We have Acumen, Songfunder, and Persistent Energy Capital. And of course, All On, which is the organization that I represent, which we have been operating in Nigeria since about 2015. We've invested in about 25 companies altogether. On the right of the screen, we have some of the entrepreneurs. Some of them are our investees, some of them are not. But we have the mini-grid players such as GVE, Renewvia, PowerGen, IO Tropical. We have some of the solar home systems, distributors, and also manufacturers, Zola Electric, Arnergy, RentSource. We also have assembly, solar assembly plants. So one of our investees, Oxano Solar, actually manufactures and assembles solar panels and other components here in Lagos for the renewable energy industry. We believe that all this action and all this collaboration is in one direction, trying to make a viable industry, trying to make a viable ecosystem that innovation can thrive in. And what are the elements of that? If you move to the next slide, I'll just very quickly touch on what the ecosystem needs right now. So what do we need? Where are the gaps between today and 2025, which is what we want to see? In All On, our own target, we have a target of 1 million new connections by 2030. And so by 2025, we hope to have achieved about 500,000 new connections to electricity through our work and through our investments in renewable energy companies. So what do we need? We need more financing, right? We need local currency financing. We need the banks to step up. We need more investors looking at the renewable energy industry and saying this is a viable investment opportunity. We need more technical skills, technical and vocational training, in collaboration with the universities, polytechnics. We need more engineers. We need more solar assemblers. We need more solar engineers coming into the workforce, because you see a situation where, let me give an example. We have an investee who is in, Abuja, building projects in River State or in Port Harcourt with customers there. When there's an issue, how do you solve this? You want to be as close to the customers as possible. So you want to be able to send an engineer there, okay, go and check out this distribution, go and check out this transmission. And so there is a lot of, I think there's a Business Day article that came out, I think a couple of days ago, and I would recommend everybody to look at that. But the solar energy industry is one of the fastest growing job creators in Nigeria today. And so there is a lot of space for new entrants into the industry, new talent, and new skills. And when you talk to any company, that's one of the things that you hear is a gap. And so I just wanted to bring that up here because it's great work that the Energy Talent Company is doing in filling that gap. Very quickly, some of the other things more, we're building awareness of reliability of the companies in the sector and the offerings that they have, cost competitiveness. Ultimately, the solar industry, where you're not off-grid, on the on-grid side, you're competing with the grid, you're competing with diesel generators, you're competing with fuels and expensive fuels. But ultimately, you can make as much of an environmental case as you want, but if the economics doesn't make sense for the consumer, you're not going to be able to close that sale. So cost competitiveness, which I'll touch on the next slide, is one of the most important things. Standardization, putting in place standards. I think the Standards Organization of Nigeria has some guidelines that they have recently put out. I know that the World Bank has a number of programs in terms of standardizing some of the building requirements, some of the barriers to entry in the sector, to make sure that the reliability of this industry is protected, and the viability of the industry in the long term is also protected. Industry coordination, I know the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria does some good work. We can do a lot more in terms of pushing and making sure that all the players have a voice. Credit assessment, being able to understand the dynamics, the demand, and the type of customers that you're going to be deploying products to. You see, this problem is really important in the solar home system space, which operates a lot of financed type of business models in there. And then appliance financing, ultimately, you want to be able to spur energy demand as much as possible. And this is a problem that we see in the off-grid space, where you build a mini grid or you build a piece of infrastructure, but then the energy demand is not there. And one of the things that we are looking to do in Allon is how do we spur energy demand in some of these off-grid locations as well, because it's one thing to put a grid and connect everybody to energy. It's another thing for people to be able to use this energy. And when you have energy consumption for productive use, that's one of the things that is going to take us to where we want to be. Let's go to the next slide. So looking ahead, going into 2025, where are we going to go? Where are we right now? What we see is increasing energy demand. With increasing urbanization, increasing grid expansion, improved power generation, energy efficient appliances, light bulbs, and some of these things that we all talk about and we see, energy demand is going to increase. We see an increase between 2020 and 2025 of about, sorry, if you could just go on mute. We see a increase or a cumulative annual growth rate of about 6.1% between 2020 and 2025. Next slide. How are we going to capture that increase, and how are we going to ensure that the renewable energy sector is going to be an efficient supplier of energy in order to capture and support this increase in demand. Because what you don't want, and there are a lot of studies that show that today the energy poverty rate in Nigeria is actually going to increase by 2030. And that is the problem that we're fighting. That is the problem that we're facing. And that's the situation that we're trying to solve, especially as All On. And I'll touch on our role as All On in a minute, just after this. But one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that in order to bridge that gap, I think one of the biggest drivers that is going to happen, or that is going to be a factor, is cost competitiveness. So over the past decade, right, renewable energy components have actually reduced in cost by a factor of about 80%. And so when you hear people talking, because I have this conversation a lot, comparing the efficiency of renewable energy versus, fuels or oil and gas and things like that, what a lot of these conversations miss is how fast or how dramatically component prices within the renewable energy have dropped in the last 10 years. And given the same rate of innovation, how fast they will continue to drop going into the future. And so on the left side of the slide, according to the ESMAP criteria, one of the most important things is in your renewable energy component or construction is your storage. Storage costs, if you look at mini grid technology, can probably sometimes take as much as 70% of the capex in each of those facilities. And so one of the things that we see happening, and that's going to be one of the most important things, is that battery costs are going to continue to reduce. So today you have an average of about $176 per kilowatt hour. Sometimes it's more. The battery costs over the next 10 years are going to reduce to about $62 per kilowatt hour. That's going to be one of the most transformative things that can happen in the renewable energy industry. Another thing that is also here today is that we don't really talk about a lot is the second life technology, or second life lithium technology. So today, when you have an electric vehicle, for example, that in more developed countries, you have electric vehicles, booming. One of the things that happens is those cars are powered by lithium-ion batteries, and their discharge factor, they have to discharge to about 80% of their capacity in order for them to be changed. Because ultimately, when you have things like accelerating, braking, and the kind of applications that electric vehicle batteries have to handle, they're very different from the kind of stationary storage that household and SME renewable energy facilities can take. And so what you find is that even when they have finished or they are not useful for vehicle use, they have a very long life that can be applied to storage and renewable energy storage use. And so one of the things that we see happening over the next 5 years is that you're going to see this second life market starting to grow. And that's going to include imports into Nigeria and things like that, and applications of local assembly and application of second life batteries. Another thing that we think is very important is local manufacturing capacity. Today we have Oxano, one of our investees, we have Blue Camel, and a lot of other plants that are coming on stream to start to assemble and eventually manufacture capacity. Oxano does solar panels. They also do a lot of some other component assembly and things like that. That's a very important, very, very important trend that we need to support, because again, an industry is built on the capacity that you're building in terms of the people, the jobs that you're creating, in terms of the skills that you're transferring, and in terms of the incremental capacity that you're building in the economy. And that brings us to technical capacity, which is hand in hand with increasing local manufacturing capacity in the sector. We need more engineers, we need more installers, we need more training. Olon has a program that we've been running for about 2 years with Rubitech Solar, a solar training program in partnership with universities and things, where we fund half of the cost to train those, and we're actively looking for more programs that we can support Because one of the things you don't want to do is, get the businesses started and then you don't have the people who are going to go in and, troubleshoot, who are going to build, who are going to, we need more electricians, we need more wiring, we need more of those things. And I think that there's a lot of space today in the industry, and that's how the industry is going to grow. This is one of the places in Nigeria that is a green shoot in terms of new jobs created. And another thing that I wanted to touch on, which is not something that we touch on today because the renewable energy industry is still a bit nascent, but it's going to become more of a factor in 2 years, 3 years, and eventually 5, 10 years, which is what we're discussing today, is about recycling. Because you see, the more solar home systems that we import and we bring into the country, the more solar panels, the more battery systems and things like that, when they start getting phased out, when they start losing their availability and life, then you have to talk about disposal. One of the big questions that's going to come is, how do you dispose of these things safely? In Nigeria, we have too much of an experience with bad, disposal techniques, bad waste management, especially with regards to power. And we do not want the renewable energy sector to then add or compound that problem. And so this is one of the things that we're going to have to start thinking about, is how do we recycle, how do we dispose safely some of these things that we are bringing into the country. And that's actively a problem, or that within All On we're actively discussing every day. And we hope that more people, even in starting businesses, have that plan in mind and they're building with that in mind. Next slide, please. So what do we see as a sustainable ecosystem within the next 5 years? One of the most important things that we need to look out for is, how does regulation evolve over the next 5 years? There's currently a renewable energy bill that's being put together by the NESG, where you talk about NERC and the interconnected mini grid regulation. How does that play out? How do discos and renewable energy entrepreneurs or off-grid mini grid developers, how does that interplay happen? Today, we have a couple of cases of litigation between discos and mini grid developers about, you're encroaching on our allocated network. We have a couple of those cases that are in court today, but we also have examples of discos and renewable or mini grid developers working together. We have a lot of those with in Abuja, the Abuja Municipal Authority. Wuse Market is an example. There are a couple of markets there where the disco seeds out a portion of its network, allows mini grid developers to come in, meter, and deploy energy, because ultimately reduces the amount of energy that they have to wheel out. And then the mini grid developers can also invest in the downstream aspect of metering and collecting of revenue. So there is a way that we can find a win-win within those two sectors, and how that evolves is going to be one of the things that we need to watch. Access to finance, I spoke about that. Standardization is also something that's important. Data, I wanted to touch on that quickly because that's very important. What kind of technologies, how do we get more data about energy demand? Because it's one thing to build a plant, it's one thing to import solar systems, another thing to understand how people use energy and what is the best fit solution for the type of customers that you are looking to target. And then again, skills, vocational skills, collaboration with universities. These are the things that we can start today to build a sustainable ecosystem that we want in 5 years. But these are some of the drivers that I wanted to touch on. But some of the good things that are happening today, private mini grid companies have an advantage in that they are small. These are entrepreneurs. They are driven by the chasing of opportunity and adventure. We see within our portfolio very high collection rates, especially in our mini grid developers, because they're close to the communities. They're designing afresh, they're designing new, they're designing with smart meters, they're designing flexibly. And I think that there is a way that even the existing utilities can learn from the innovation of mini grid companies and solar home systems companies and companies within the renewable energy space. And so my best case scenario for the next 5 years is that we will see a lot more partnership. We'll see a lot more supportive regulation within the sector. And some of the things that are important. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to touch on the most important things that we need to be focusing on. The most important things that we need to be focusing on is connecting the unconnected today. That's increasing energy access, growing and stimulating energy demand. So even in the connections that we have, making sure that there is appliance financing. There are people who are using this electricity and people have, because electricity is good if you have a light that you can, put on for your children to read at night. It's a whole different matter when you have electricity to run your factory, to run your small business, and to then increase, economic outcomes for yourself and for your community. That is what is going to take us to the next level as an industrialized economy, and that's what we're looking to build. So just to touch on the very quickly where we are, or our space within Allon, access to finance is absolutely key. And so in Allon, what we do is we design financing solutions across the entrepreneurial life cycle. For early stage proof of concept, we have grants and things like that. And then as you move across the entrepreneurial life cycle, there are then different types of finance that you can access. Let's go to the next slide very quickly. And so just to touch on what we do at Allon, like I said, we are focusing on being a catalyst to the development of the off-grid sector. And we do that in three ways. Impact investing, so that touches on the access to finance bit that I spoke of earlier. We invest debt and equity instruments into renewable energy firms across that entrepreneurial life cycle. So from ideation stage up to growth and market entry stage. That's the first thing that we do, which is impact investing. Today, we deployed to about 25, 30 companies. We've deployed more than $12 million in total. Enabling finance is another important thing that we do. And so that is basically through our position as first loss or first capital risk takers. We basically coordinate with other investors, other donor agencies and things like that to come in and build finance products that can work for entrepreneurs within the space. And so, like I spoke on our collaboration with the Africa Development Bank, I spoke on our collaboration with the USADF, we have collaborations with the Rockefeller Foundation as well. All these facilities, we have collaborations with the Bank of Industry as well. So seeding these facilities and making sure that there is more pool of money for renewable energy entrepreneurs who need to access finance, even outside of our direct portfolio, is another thing that we do. And then the third thing that we do is building an enabling environment. So facilitating research, facilitating regulatory interactions and conversations with policymakers. And then, in collaboration with all our global and local partners, building partnerships is another very important thing that we do. This is our definition of impact. New connections, we believe we have a very aggressive target about connecting new people to electricity, job creation in the industry, building more resilient and sustainable companies, and having them be able to take people, building productive use, driving economic activity through the availability of power, building capacity, and then leveraging new investment. So through our position, bringing more investors into the space. Those are some of the most important things that we consider. And so we have targets over the next 5 years and over the next 10 years as well. Next slide. And so in my final slide, just to touch on what do we need. And so anybody who's listening today, the industry has, just to buttress, access to finance, technical skills, data, capacity development, more partnerships, and more standards. We believe that these are some of the things that, for anybody who is thinking of entering into the sector, these are some of the things that you should be thinking about. How do we leverage? How do we close these gaps? Other opportunities that I wanted to share, aside from being a solar engineer, there are other things that you can contribute. Payments technology, that's missing in the industry today. That's a high impact area that you can work on. Credit tools, credit assessment tools, system design innovation around data analytics, and energy demand data, energy use data, and things like that. Productive use solutions, solar appliances and things like that. These are things that you can innovate around in order to build a more resilient industry. smart metering, agent banking. So these are some of the things that you want to consider. If you're not actually building a mini grid, these are some of the things that you can also build that the industry needs in order to service its customers efficiently and build a more resilient industry. So